welcome everyone. Today's Virtual Mental Health Monday. We're so excited to have our guest Cheryl Acker Dodson. Um, Before we get to Cheryl, Virtual Mental Health Monday is a series where we explore health and wellness through a holistic and creative lens. My name is Kimberly Kirkland, and I'm with UAB Arts and Medicine. And our mission is to enhance healing and wellness for patients, families, and staff in healthcare settings, and also for people in community settings through arts and creative expression. If you'd like to write your name in the chat, let us know maybe where you're Zooming from. And if you'd like to share your interest or connection to this topic, we welcome that. This is being recorded. So if you would prefer to have your uh, camera turned off, feel free to do so, but we would love to see you. Also, we will be doing a Q&A after Cheryl finishes her presentation. So please feel free to type any questions you have into the chat, and we'll get to those toward the end of the program. So now I'd also like to just give a little welcome to Mr. Heath Mixon, the director of the Alice Stevens Center. He is going to be co-hosting with me today. So now I'd like to get to our guest Cheryl. Today we're talking about suicide prevention. Cheryl is a dedicated mental health advocate who turned personal tragedy into a mission for suicide prevention after losing her friend to suicide. Cheryl is the executive director of ASPARC, or the Alabama Suicide Prevention and Resources Coalition, and she is a certified QPR gatekeeper trainer, and I think she's done over 100 trainings at this point. But she also founded the annual Wildflower Walk and Wellness Fair in her hometown of Woodstock, Alabama in 2018 to help raise mental health awareness and provide suicide loss survivors with a public event to honor their loss. And she also serves on the Indian Rivers Behavioral Health Board of Directors and the State of Alabama Mental Illness Planning Council. And of course, she was featured in the podcast S Town. And she's also one of the kindest people on the planet. So I am just thrilled that she's with us today. And at this point, I will turn it over to Cheryl. Thank
Thank
you.
you. I'm so excited to be with y'all today. And it's nice to have a safe space to talk about this. I think we all know someone who has struggled, or we have struggled ourselves personally. So being able to have this conversation, and just full, I guess, disclosure for me, this was a conversation that I couldn't have when I had a friend in crisis. I was scared to talk about this with him, and I'll share this journey with you. I'll go ahead and I'll tell you my story, but I'll tell it to you with this PowerPoint. So I'm going to share with you. I'm going to Georgia tomorrow, and this is a PowerPoint I'm doing with them. So I wanted to share this with you, but we'll do a little bit different version today. But I think one thing that's important is, if you've ever encountered someone that is in crisis, or had a difficulty yourself, you would never imagine for the world to know about it. So when the podcast was released, and it was one of the most painful moments in my life, I wanted to hide under a rock and disappear, but thankfully all the beautiful people that do the work like most of you are doing were out there and reached out, and I'm so very thankful. So I don't know all of your backgrounds. I saw some of the sign in, but I know that y'all are the unsung heroes out there every day doing this work, and I just want to thank you. So, a couple of things I want to discuss in this amount of time today are, what it's like to have painful moments go viral with social media, but then the beauty of the connection, and then what we can all do individually ourselves. But I never like to share this story without just talking about John. My friend John B. McLemore, whether you have listened to the S Town podcast or not, We all, I believe, have a John in our lives, and this is my John. And I just always like to share him because he, in a way, with the notoriety, became a character. But I just like to remember that he was a person. He was a great friend. He was mischievous, So just like to begin with that note. So for me, I just bought a clock at a yard sale, and they said, and it didn't work. And I thought it was cute. And they said, well, you ought to take it to John. He repairs clocks. So, I have a little $3 1940s clock, not ever imagining that John was the talented antique clock restorer that he was. And then I share this image of John just because there he is with all his Furbies. So a lot of times people don't see images of him online with a smile. And what I say, with S-Town, people met John at 11 p.m. before the clock struck 12. And I like to take you back a little bit further where, like in this, he was fascinated with Furbies, the technology. He loved that they didn't just repeat the noises, that they created their own language, but he was talented enough that he got to sync them into a 3-part harmony of row, row, row your boat. So not your typical experience if you went over to visit John. So our friendship began partly through the clock repair, but then we all both began, we had a love for music. So we would go over to his house, we would listen to music, and he'd make me CDs back then. And just going back to that, so then I lost John in 2015, and I'll just be honest, when we lost him, when it came to suicide and the stigma with it, I just think now in hindsight that we didn't really grieve him, we didn't honor him the way he should have been honored, and I'll talk more about stigma coming up, but it shocks me now. And then in 2016, my husband was sworn in as mayor in November. And in 20, right, so that was November. 1 month later, at the bottom image, you'll see Brian Reed, a journalist, reached out to me and he said, I want to do a story about your friend. And I remember saying, well, I don't want to talk to you about suicide. I don't want to talk to you about his death. And the funny thing is when Brian come to the house, I talked to him for 4 hours. So I don't know if you have experienced a suicide, but when we get a safe space to talk about someone, we need that. And so I was upset at my husband at the time when he took that picture. And you can see I'm still in my work clothes. I worked at Hendrick Chevrolet in the service department, and so it was just, but I'm glad now he captured that little moment in time, because little did I know how much that moment was going to change my life. So 3 months later, this image is released, and the title is S-Town, and I guess the funny thing is when Brian was leaving the house, I followed him to the door, and I told my husband, I looked back and I said, what does it matter? Nobody's going to listen to this. And my husband just shook his head. And so this image, when it was released in March, and the title S-Town, I kind of panicked because I just told you my husband's mayor. Well, I had just done an interview for a podcast entitled Shit Town. So that was something like, I thought, oh, what have I done? So we see that logo, and I confessed to Jeff. I said, that interview I did a few months ago, it's about to be released. April 3rd of 2017, it had been 4 days, and it had 10 million downloads. I remember my son calling me on the phone, and he said, Mom, do you know you're on the #1 podcast in America? And I said, oh, I did know. I was hoping you didn't know. I just honestly thought that this would be something that would be isolated to another area of the country and just really wouldn't be released or really be well known in our area. And those headlines kept coming, 16 million. My husband, for a small town of 1,700, it was incredible for the media to be contacting him. So when we went viral, we were getting interview requests from the New York Times, Sydney Morning Herald, the Guardian, Rolling Stone, and so all those headlines, they weren't necessarily in a good light. So it was a contradiction for me because I had lost a friend. It was a public manner, but then there was the people that assumed certain things about our area, and so it was difficult. So I felt loyal to my community, but and I felt defensive of my husband and the position that he was in. Um, and I would go to work, and I would have my phone on Facebook, and I would have like 78 notifications. And I was devastated, and I really wanted to delete my social media and disappear. But then one day, I just remembered that I had my memories, that everybody online had the audio of S Town, but I had the actual memories. So I shared this image of the door of my house where my children's heights are measured, and John is on that door. And then I think things began to change. So, but I do want to say that, staying positive was very hard publicly. But I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't argue with people online. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't type stuff in, but thank goodness I would not, hit send. I would try to sleep on it and think about it. And again, I would try to share things with people that, and then people became hungry for the real part of John, where he became more than a character and back to an individual again. And part of that was I went out to his house. My friend owned his property, and she said, Cheryl, go out there and, let's look at it, because, they were, kind of at a loss too. They had purchased the property prior to the podcast and really didn't know. And out in his workshop, his business cards were scattered across the counter. So I picked them up, and I thought, well, there was some really nasty people online, but there were some really sweet people. And I said, I'm going to mail these out, kind of like the Willy Wonka golden ticket. I'd mail these out to people that were nice to me online. And then I started getting mail back and videos, and people were crying. They were showing me where it was framed in their house, and it really meant a lot to them. So I went to the printer, and I said, I hate to reprint them, but I started to mail them out with suicide prevention information, and was just really getting a good response. So I said, well, I'm not charging people for them, and I guess I'll just have them reprinted. And so when I went to reprint them, I dropped the order off, and there was a young man at the print shop. And when I went to pick it up, he was waiting for me at the counter, and I thought, uh-oh. But he said, did you know him? And I said, I did. So this is where my path crosses with another part of the story that's beautiful. I thought, oh no, but what was happening, I guess you'd say across town, there we are in Birmingham, so I know some of y'all are in that area today. Katie Boget was getting her degree from the University of Montevallo. And I think Dr. David Combs is online with us today. Dr. Judith Harrington, and 20 years ago, they had begun the Alabama Suicide Prevention and Resource Coalition. And it began as a task force and then became a nonprofit. Katie had been hired as the grant coordinator for the Garrett Lee Smith grant. And that grant began because Senator Gordon Smith had lost his son the day before his 22nd birthday. So ASPARC had received that grant, and so Katie was managing that while she completed her degree. And ASPARC, we spend the majority of our efforts on a training called QPR. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's basically CPR for a mental health crisis. So we're going to teach individuals how to ask, listen, and get you some help. So that's the concept of question, persuade, refer. So Katie said she is listening to S Town. Her and her husband had went on a road trip, and she said when they got down to where they were going, they still had 2 chapters left. And she said we sat in the car and finished it. She said it was just fascinating to her. And then one day she gets a text from her little brother who worked at the print shop, and he says, "Look what walked in today," and it was the business cards. And you can see her saying, "Oh my gosh," and he said he's keeping one. So when I went to that counter thinking, "Oh no, I'm in trouble," he said, "My sister's Katie Boget." And it still makes me emotional because it was really, truly divine intervention. She said to me, "Can we meet for lunch? Let's see what we can do for suicide prevention in Alabama." So it was just a beautiful thing where our 2 stories merged. So our work began after that meeting, and I like to share at that meeting. She told me 2 things because I don't know your background, but she told me one thing was to forgive yourself. If you've lost someone to suicide or you've struggled, forgive yourself. A lot of times we beat ourselves up and we think about the last conversations, the last interactions, but let's use that loss to help someone who feels like that individual. And I encourage you to forgive yourself. So that's one thing, is to forgive yourself, and then let's honor them by what we go forward with. So we started setting up tables, and this was one of our first events at the Woodstock Music Festival. And for any of you that are out doing work like this, when you put a tablecloth on a table that says suicide in the title, most of the time people are just going to keep walking. So I always like to share that with people that are out doing the work. That doesn't mean the work isn't important, because that particular event, I did everything I could think of to get people to stop. Gave out goodies, I even gave out banana pudding, But then I was kind of disheartened when I would see the pamphlets on the ground, and I was packing up the car when the event was over, and I really didn't feel like we reached anybody. So I'm putting the stuff in the back of my car, and a young girl walks up to me, and it was late in the evening, and she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I was out here. I was trying to help somebody, that might be struggling, and but it really didn't get a lot of people, because I was thinking, well, this is it. I'm not doing this anymore because I felt so foolish." And that young girl said to me, she said, "Oh, you did this for me." So that one person, I just like to share that, because you may not see that one person, but that doesn't mean that your work and your efforts are foolish. We won't see those people that are online. So a lot of times we may encounter 10 people in an event, but I can tell you, I'm so glad now that grant applications let us share how many people we reach online. So there are people that need us to be setting up the tables, doing the work, and feeling foolish, and they may not stop and talk to us. They may have family or friends with them, and they may not want to be seen talking to us, but they truly appreciate the work that we do. And one of the parts when it comes to the art and healing was, a lot of people that met John on the podcast wanted to grieve for him as well. And so one of the common questions that I would get would be like, what was John's favorite flowers? And so I had the bright idea. I said, well, if y'all will mail me seeds, I will plant them. And so I contacted a family member that had a piece of land, and I said, well, can we plant some wildflowers there? So this is the first event, and it wasn't without stress, just like a movie. We had the tractor tear up. We had people not sure if they were showing up. Got down to the day of the wildflower walk, and my husband whispered in my ear while we were having the event that the field was being plowed up as we speak. So we made it happen. And I just can't tell you enough what it was like to see those first little blooms. It was really, really beautiful, and I'm very, very thankful. And there they are when they're really so. again, just like a seed, I like that example is, when we plant that seed, we may not see that bloom, or that bloom may be years from now, but it's important. It's just like if you talk to someone about going to therapy, they may not necessarily pick up the phone in that moment and make an appointment, but we are bringing that into their awareness that help is available. And then I think that's the next music festival with a bouquet from the wildflower field. And so all of those people were there when we planted it, and they were there when it bloomed. So how did we start connecting and expanding upon that? Um, One thing was Katie invited me to speak in 2018 to the ASPARC annual conference, and I was very insecure about that. Before I did this work, I worked at a Chevrolet dealership, so I didn't have a mental health background, and I'll be honest, I felt like an imposter. Um, but I thought, that this message was important and that we should share. And so when we began the work, when they mailed the wildflower seeds, I wanted to share with you that another thing that people wanted to do was feel like they could attend a memorial service. So um, when I would mail them a thank you letter or whatever, we would do the tags, and the tags started getting returned, and it became its own art exhibit. It was more or less a virtual guest book, but I could have never imagined what would happen. And this is the part of healing and therapy, that so I had this on display at my house, and I'd take it at the music festival, and now we have it at our little community library for people to see. And the individual images, I wish I had more of them, but I added a slide just to where you could see that in addition to the tags, we started receiving artwork. I saved the flower packets. That's that top image that's a little bit out of line, but then we began participating as the B team at the AFSP Out of the Darkness Walk. And then because of the doors at my home, one of the outreach messages we did were that we were now opening doors to awareness, and people would also sign those doors as a guest book at events as well. So it just continued with the art. People wrote songs. It was just an incredible thing to see the different people and the way that they shared how they were affected. And I think so. Like, there's one individual tag where, like, from the Great Lakes state. So it's just we received the seeds and the tags from 27 states, 5 countries, and that image on the right is the song lyrics. I had a painting or a canvas with the flowers drawn on it, and we did the lyrics of the song. And a special friend of mine, Spencer, wrote that song, and he was living in the UK. So it was just incredible to me that someone across the overseas, just could also understand what we were going through. So when he wrote Ballad of the Wildflowers, I just thought it was a beautiful part of this journey. And one thing that I would have never imagined was the commitment from the town now. So we have a public memorial garden. The town recently at the last Wildflower Walk invested $40,000, and that stone wall is designed where it's at a height where you can sit on it. And I don't know if many of you realize, but again, you can't make this up, but we went to the landscaper and said, "Do you have a fountain in stock?" And they said, "We only have one, but it's an eternal flame." And I thought that was just incredible, because that's the logo of Alabama Suicide Prevention. So we have that fountain, and I don't think you can really tell from this image, but around that fountain are memorial rocks that you can paint with a message of hope or to honor a loved one, just like the tag. So we have that outdoor way to honor someone as well. In addition to what we've done at the town of Woodstock, um, I think that it's important to show where we have went to the state legislature for Advocacy Day. And then I think one thing that's been very important for us is to track our data and show how many people we've trained, what our milestones are, and then the power of partnerships. That's been a really important part of this journey, is to realize who have who may have similar goals as your organization or the work you're doing, and make it, well, it's just to your advantage to partner with them and just become stronger, because you're really truly on the same team. So one thing that we did outside of the box is we got a tourism grant. So I always thought that that was unusual for a mental health event to have a tourism grant, and very, very thankful. So now that helps us with our brochures, marketing the event, and it's wonderful to me to see that it's a family-friendly event, and to see young people say, "Man, this is beautiful. I look forward to it every year." So raising that awareness that help is available, and then having that opportunity to plant wildflowers and honor someone or their own individual struggle is important. Another thing with our culture, when we go out to different organizations and we talk about stigma, one story that stands out is one of my colleagues said that 18 years ago, she made an attempt on her life, and she said, "I was in the ICU 3 days, and just really, really close to losing her life." And when she got home, she could look at her coffee table, and she couldn't think of the words coffee table. She tried to go back to work. She looked at her coworkers, and she couldn't remember their names. And she said, "Meanwhile, I got a letter from my church, and they said, 'Don't come back.'" And she said, "I was very devastated." Now, I'll tell you a spoiler. She'll say, "Now I have a new faith organization, and they love me, and they but I share that story especially when we're in faith-based organizations, because a lot of times in our area, that's the first thing that we're going to say is your faith, but someone may have had an experience like Christy and feel isolated and different and alone. So when we share that story, what we share with it is that message that she said, "In 49 years of struggling with my mental health, where's my casserole?" And that kind of has been our little popular thing to say, you know what, that's right. When someone has a baby or a surgery, our culture, we show up with food and comfort them. But like a young lady told us when she got a job in a hospital, when you go to behavioral health floor, there's no get well soon cards, there's no visitors, there's no flowers. So this isn't a way to do anything but to make people aware that we can do better. So that's why we've had people take a picture with that empty dish, because it's just time to fill these dishes and show up. And that might be, "Can I meet you at McDonald's for a cup of coffee?" But whatever you would do, the main message is don't avoid that individual, and support them in the same way that you would do someone that maybe had a physical illness. And so in talking about what we do, we are proud to say that since 2018, we've trained 11,000 people in QPR, and most of these trainings are under 30 individuals. So that's a lot of trainings. So we're very, very proud to reach that many people. But again, we can't do that without the help of people like you. So our grant, we don't charge for this training, but you may know people that I don't know. So if you think that your organization would benefit from a QPR training, please reach out to us, and we'd love to come to you, whether it be on Zoom or in person, and bring that information to you about how to have that conversation. And then when we've had this conversation, I always like to show people that, just like any other part of a journey, there's a part that is unexpected. So I show this because I've gotten to my GPS before, and like one time there was a ferry. One time that the water was on both sides of the road, and it said, "You have arrived." And then like when we got to Gee's Bend, Alabama, that group of individuals had never heard of 988. So it's really important to bring it to this conversation to these areas that don't have the resources that we may have in, like, Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, our larger cities. And since we are working with UAB, I thought it was important to share the work that y'all do, like with our founders that began our organization. But then also, I've been a guest lecturer now for Dr. Angela Sullivan's training and her course that she's offered. I think it's been offered twice now. So there's actually, UAB has a suicide prevention course. Yeah, there it is. Whoops. So yeah, I just encourage you, if any of you are interested, to to support that. I hope that course continues, but we're very, very hopeful, and also hopeful that other colleges and universities will follow that lead and begin this course. Because what we find out when we do this training is people that have become social workers, pharmacists, counselors, they say, I'm talking to individuals about suicide and ideation of suicide a lot more frequently than I was prepared to be. One thing that was incredible was last year we did this PowerPoint at the American Association of Suicidology Conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, and it was intimidating because a lot of times when you're from Alabama, they always want to show you that we rank 50th in certain things, and that's correct. We may be 50th in the number of providers, but I like to share, like what am I going to show these people that have these large budgets and what they can do? But I think that the power of connection is what was so important in our story. So when we did this presentation there, we were the last day, we were after lunch, and I thought nobody is going to come to this presentation, and still, like I said, makes me emotional for that room. People sitting in the floor. So I think this story does have impact, and I hope that it continues to be shared. And I want to thank Kimberly and Heath and everyone for allowing me the opportunity to share this story, because I do think people need this. And I'm going actually tomorrow to share it to the Georgia Suicide Prevention Conference. So never think that, your purpose, don't minimize it. Whatever your role it is, it's important in this work. So don't be afraid to ask for help. And one thing that we started that's been very, very helpful in our QPR trainings is adding this slide and letting people know how they can help. Everybody might not be a public speaker, but they can complete a survey, they can host a training, they can do something as simple as follow us on social media. They may know about a grant application we can apply for. They begin to share their story. Many people have done something as simple as buy a Woodstock Music Festival t-shirt, and that t-shirt has raised thousands of money for us. At one point, ASPARC, we only had $2,000 in the bank and didn't really know what our future was going to be like. And so I'm here and able to join you today because of the simple things that people did to support us. So letting people know that they can donate, recommend us for donations. We've had a group of high school students do a talent show. So, things like that are incredible. And then people can join ASPARC. You may know someone that wants to be or needs an internship. If you're getting a master's in public health, and those interns and volunteers have created our brochures. They've done some great work with our data, grant applications. So those individuals have been really, really important to our work. And then it was just incredible to be invited to the September is Suicide Prevention Month. So to be invited to that proclamation signing was a really a big honor for me. And so I'll joke with people and say, so going from S-Town to the governor's office was something that I would have never pictured when this journey began. And one of my favorite images from a previous wildflower walk is a young woman who had lost her father to suicide, and that particular wildflower walk we gave a permanent wildflower out. So you may not can tell, but her bracelet says "My story isn't over," and so just bringing that awareness out is just so important. And remember that there's a wonderful statistic that I can't give you that we'll never know in the work we do is one thing we don't know is the lives we save, you know. So that doesn't mean that, just because we're not aware of it doesn't mean that the work we're doing is not incredible, because it is hard when you turn on the news and you see of someone we've lost, or your social media, or in your direct family. It's difficult, but that doesn't mean that we're not still saving individuals by doing this. So I will stop sharing and be happy to answer any questions or anything that I can help you with.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I love to hear your story. And just a reminder to everybody, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat, or really, if you'd like to just unmute yourself, that is fine too. And Heath, of course, what are your thoughts? Do you have any questions for Cheryl?
Well, Cheryl and I connected way before, because I had such a strong connection with the podcast, and had gotten a tattoo inspired by S Town, and was shared her contact there. And then I thought, it would be cool to have somebody come and talk about that podcast. And we've booked Brian Reed for that show coming up to talk about the creation of S Town. I think my question for Cheryl today is, was there a moment of clarity for you after John's passing and with the podcast, that you said to yourself, oh, this is my life's work. This is, this tragedy is moving me toward that? Or was it a multitude of different things that led you to help others?
That's a good question, and I went down memory lane today. I have in addition to the tags, the wildflower seeds, I got these incredible letters, and one of the ladies that I became a pen pal with, I'm glad you asked that, because I don't know if any of you can see, but one of the letters, and she had drawn John, but when I read the letter, it makes me cry, but she said, I am a John. And so that's when I started realizing it was so much bigger, that's when I said I can't just put a lid on the box, close the drawer. But yeah, just seeing how connected, and I see in the comments like Michelle saying that she didn't have the pleasure of John, but Brian told the story so well, people really felt connected, and so it just it's just been incredible. But yeah, and I see the question like volunteers. We love volunteers that can table events, help us spread the message. There's all different things that people can do to become involved. But yeah, I think that when I started realizing that, like Laura saying I am a John, that was a real. She actually even drove down here from Canada. I mean, so we've had people that came to our town from overseas in the UK, and just realizing that there was a very, very strong connection to John's story.
Cheryl, I would love to ask you a question as well. So I know that kind of immediately after the podcast was released, it was difficult for the town. But how has the town been impacted or changed, like over the long, since 2020? was it 2018? Yeah, since
Yeah,
2018.
that's a great question because at first we were ashamed, you know. We felt like we had been stereotyped as racist, homophobic, um, you know, really not there with mental health support, and in a lot of these ways that was true. Like I looked at myself and I said, you know, John asked me to read his note, and I said, no, John, I'm not going to read that, you know. So that's one thing I like to share is this was a conversation I couldn't have. But what happened was with the town, we lost other individuals, including John. I think we began to look in the mirror and said, we do have a problem. John may have been the catalyst for this work, you know. Um, but 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 yeah, I think that uh, we looked at ourselves as, you know, John was, we are a small town, so when the story hit, John was no stranger to us. So it was like, did we give John the support he needed? I don't, you know, and I don't think we did. And I think people expected us to be more defensive about that, but they were surprised when they said, you know, I think we can do more.
Yeah, that's great. And I've had the pleasure of seeing the memorial, you know, the fountain. And I remember you saying something about like the the town council like has really
Mhm.
come to embrace the work that you're doing in A Spark.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're blessed that we have council members that will say, I've personally struggled or I've served in the
Mm,
military. And so seeing that what John struggled with, you know, was not immune to different members of our community.
yeah. Yes. So again, if anyone has any questions for Cheryl, please feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can just go ahead and unmute. I do have another question. Will you tell us a little bit more about the music festival that y'all do?
Yeah, this year it's going to be May 17th. It's at Holiday Raceway, and this year the Memorial Garden that will be funding an expansion for it that will include a child's playground, and so um, uh, you know we'll be having some great announcements coming up, and maybe some potential drawings of what our vision for that is. But when you buy the T-shirts and attend the event this year, you will be funding that, and I like. Bringing this conversation to younger individuals in our community. You know, the Wildflower Walk is attended by a lot of teenagers. So, you know, the younger that we begin this conversation about sometimes you may feel this, you may experience this, I think that that's the best way to work and help individuals is early education about their emotions and their struggles.
Absolutely.
I have a message from someone. How can you best support someone who had a family member or a friend who took their life by
Um,
suicide?
you know, I think it's a lot of times it's just absolutely just being there. I think one thing for me that was really freeing was I thought I had to have answers and solutions, and I didn't have to. It was a wonderful thing to realize I didn't have to fix them, but being there for them, setting that reminder on the phone to just check in. How are you doing? You know, can we meet for a cup of coffee? Can we talk? And not letting that loved one lose their identity. You know, a lot of times people avoid saying their name, remembering their life. It's like they let their death define their life. So, you know, those are several things that, you know, making sure that we do that is remember their life and honor that, and then also, you know, just being present.
Michelle asked, do you still conduct the Wildflower Walk? And how do you
Yes.
get involved with that?
Yeah, this year, let's see, the Wildfire Walk, I was going to say, I'm glad you asked. Let's see, we've set the date for that, and it will be September 6th this year from 10 to 12. So we always have it on a Saturday morning. And we last year from UAB we had WBHM there, so that was exciting. Let's see. We do work. Most of our work begins with middle schools. That age is approved for QPR and up, and then we're actually going to, well, it's a high school. We're going to Calera High School next month and doing 2 days of training. So it's becoming more acceptable. But, you know, when I first started, even just 6-7 years ago with ASPARC, it was taboo. If you mentioned bringing this topic into a school, you felt like you were selling something. So it's nice now for people to say, please come and talk to my students. And young people are not given enough credit. They're fully aware of what their friends are experiencing. So what I tell people is the misinformation is out there. Let's give them the actual facts and things that they can do that will actually make a difference.
Laura asked, do you ever do the QPR training in work locations, like for companies and stuff?
Oh yes, and we do it for a variety. We've done it for tool companies, credit unions. I don't think anyone doesn't benefit from this, so yeah, there's certain workplaces that have a higher stress. One of my favorite ones was and they had told me before we come in, they said, now this is going to be a tough group, and it was construction workers, and they were so receptive. I mean, to see them afterwards, they'd come up and say, you know what, I think I'm being too hard on my stepson, because of certain groups will say, oh, just toughen up, or things like that, and realizing that telling a young person, what you're going through is tough, instead of learning to validate them instead of minimizing what they're experiencing. But we love to come to workplaces. I'll tell people, if you'll give us a place to speak, I'll talk.
And I just wanted to share a couple of comments that came through earlier just to kind of lift those up. But Rhonda from UAB Public Health, she said early on that this topic is close to her, unfortunately, because her daughter took her life at 21 while attending her university. And she also shared later that when you spoke about forgiving yourself, she said, I needed to hear that because it's been 5 years and I still haven't forgiven myself. My only daughter has light and love and touched so many lives, and I let her down. I wasn't there when she needed me the most. Reliving those moments are the hardest.
Well, I pray. I'm thankful that you shared that, because that's something that all of us that have experienced a loss, that's what we feel. And I know, like for me, it was like holding my breath to say that, and I felt like I was going to be criticized or ridiculed when I said that. I avoided phone calls from John, or I would see him and maybe stay in my car if I saw him in the store, and things that that were hard for me to admit, but we all do that. I've had a sister say, oh, let me take a shower and I'll call you right back, and then never call them back. So you replay those moments where you didn't support them. So I think it's important for us to say that, for all of us that are grieving, that we do have those moments. And so it's hard, but like you said, the beautiful individual that you lost, she deserves to be honored. So planting the flowers, keeping their memory alive. I thank you for putting that in the chat, because it's also supports me in the work I do. Like, am I reaching anybody? Does this make a difference? And so the loss that you've experienced with a child, I thank you for sharing that with us today, and being a part of this.
Absolutely. And I have another question. And again, we would love to hear from our audience. I don't want to ask all the questions, but are there any new projects, Cheryl, that you're excited about, or even new presentations or anything that you're excited about? on the horizon?
Yeah, the S-Town is probably going to become even bigger because it's becoming a TV show. So I think that the story apparently did reach a lot of people. Apple TV bought it. It's my understanding New York Times owns it now. I think they bought it from This American Life. So I am excited and, of course, a little bit hesitant about how this story will be captured or presented again. But I also think that there's an important part of this part of the story to be shared. So I'm very, very hopeful that if the story is told, that this work that came afterwards is also important, and because people that have lost someone, they do need that healing. And what can we do going forward? Because when you've lost someone, it's like your life before that loss and your life after. So where do we go from here?
Well, that is exciting and a great opportunity to to further your work with A Sport.
I had
Well, does
one
any
question.
oh,
Cheryl, I am interested in knowing. I know that a lot of times the death or passing of someone is overshadowed by the wonderful things about them. We have an idea of who John was by listening to the podcast. Um, how do you remember him?
Oh, I'm thankful that this has let me do that. And so, yeah, I remember his music and his mischief, and just how compassionate he was. When the people met him in the podcast, he was struggling and he was bitter, but when he got excited about something, he was very obsessive, and he was all in. So I'm hopeful, and I'm glad you say that, because even with the potential that the story is still coming, when memories like that come to me, I try to write them down, because I think it's important for people to know that. Like, one, to know John earlier in his life when he wasn't in so much crisis. And then I also want people to know that his memory and his story didn't end at that cemetery. That I've had people that came to town, and that's one thing that I always, when they want to see different locations, I just say we're not going to end with the cemetery, because the story doesn't end here.
thank you so much, Cheryl. I just wanted to also read this last comment that came up. Richard, he said, "Thank you for this work. I'm a former UAB faculty member. His son, his 36-year-old son, died of suicide in June 2021 when we were living in Northern Virginia." He says, "My wife and I are now leading a suicide loss grief support group through our church in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where we live now." So, so yeah, and we're about at time, but what are your thoughts about like people who experience difficult things? I mean, whether it's a suicide loss, something like that, and then use that to support other people and help other people, because that's what you've done, and so just curious about your thoughts about how that could be healing.
I'm glad Richard made that comment, because as survivors of suicide loss, we have a different grief. Um, we have, we're not in the same support group as someone that's lost someone to a motor vehicle accident or a heart attack. Suicide loss has a specific grief, and Dr. Harrington, that started our organization, one thing when I took her class at that same conference, she said that the complicated grief of a suicide loss has a blame, a shame, a judgment, and a big old mystery. And so to me, I said, oh my gosh, that's why S-Town was so popular. What everyone that has a suicide loss personally experiences, we just experience that publicly. So you do blame yourself. You are ashamed. You do experience a lot of judgment. And then there's a big mystery. A lot of times we'll never know exactly what but there's the combination, like with John. I think that many factors played into it. It wasn't just one individual. And that's another example Dr. Harrington gives, is that, if someone has a cup that's filling up over a 10-year period, that one individual instant may be that last drop in the cup, but that is not the full reason for someone, considering to end their life. That it's that entire contents of that cup. So, I see a question too that, the state's mental health system. We have the Department of Mental Health. We are partnering with them. They support like our annual conference, but a majority of the funding and support we do are like through federal grants, like maybe the VA. We work really strongly with. Then we have a large veteran population in Alabama. So trying to reach those areas, and then because of that, we, also talking to veteran spouses, veterans' children. But yeah, I hope that this advocacy and this story, allows us to expand that partnership with the Department of Mental Health and to increase the work that we're doing. But we have a good relationship with them. But a lot of our funding is federal and then by private individuals.
Thank you. And I do want to ask this last question from David, because I know you talk about it in the training, but David asks, if you suspect someone might be having suicidal ideation, thinking about suicide, should you ask the person directly and unambiguously?
Yeah, and what we do in the QPR training is say, ask directly and ask in a way that they can say yes. We also, one of the things that we coach about is how not to ask, so as, if my body language and my face and my tone is asking in a way that I'm looking like, please say no, that's what they're going to say. So, ask in a way that says, what you've experienced, what you've told me, it makes me concerned. Or are you thinking about suicide? Or are you thinking about killing yourself? People want to soften it to like, are you thinking of hurting yourself or harming yourself? Well, then you're not really clear if, so being direct is what we encourage you to do, but also, trying to imagine what you look like in the mirror. Are you asking in a way that they can say yes? Yes, I am thinking about it. And that is the hardest part, is asking. And then the beauty of it is then you just have to listen, Well, tell me why you're thinking about this, And so that listening is what actually we believe saves lives, and then going from there. But you don't have to have solutions. You don't have to give advice. It's just saying, what you're going through is tough. Tell me more about it. I'm here for you.
Yeah, that's so important, because I know it's a scary thing for people to bring up. We are at time, so I understand if people need to leave. But Laura has asked if you are concerned about federal grant funding with what's happening currently.
Yeah. Several of our partners, that has become a concern. So what we've been really discussing with our funds is just being really, really responsible, and trying to look at our budget right now and see how long we can continue to offer the services, but maybe doing everything we can to cut our costs. Fortunately, we're in a better shape than we've been in previous years. So we've just looked at our bank balance and just said, let's be really conservative with our spending right now, with the future being unknown. So hopefully right now, nothing will be affected with the work we do. We've never been to a point where we've had to deny someone a QPR training, and we want to make sure that that's something that we really we're really committed to doing, and providing that training for anyone at no cost.
Mm. Thank you, Cheryl. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. Such an important topic. And Cheryl, thank you so much for your time. Heath, thank you for co hosting with me. And I would just like to share, if you are in the Birmingham area or want to travel to Birmingham, please come and join us on February 28th for an evening with Brian Reed, the creator of the S Town podcast. I think Heath, we still have some tickets available. Is that right?
We do.
Yes. So I think that's going to be a wonderful conversation. And then also our next virtual mental health Monday is March 17th. It's the one of two VMHMs as part of our Disability Arts Festival that will run from March 6th to May 10th. But we'll talk with two nationally recognized artists, Jessica Blinkhorn and Victoria Duggar, about the challenges of access in creative spaces, art as a catalyst for change, and reshaping traditional aesthetics to prioritize accessibility and welcoming spaces. So, again, Cheryl, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks for having me, Kimberly.